Hello and welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with NICE, Auscontact's national gold sponsor, and it's entitled How to Transform Your Customer Service with AI. And now for our welcome to country. In the spirit of reconciliation, Auscontact acknowledges the traditional custodians of our country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and during that time, with the help of today's special guests, Belinda and Chris, we'd love you to engage in the conversation and provide you with some ideas to take back to your respective businesses. To round off the webinar, we'll be having a Q&A. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time to run through some housekeeping. Remember to interact with us to maximise the benefit. And as you know, there's no need to take too many notes now because we'll be providing you with a recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please use the Q&A button on the control panel. You can ask questions or make comments for Belinda, Chris or myself at any time. Please type your questions as we go along so you don't forget to ask them. However, if you ask a question anonymously and we don't get to it in the Q&A, we're unable to respond post the webinar because we don't know who you are. And we can't provide you with one of the 3 prizes which I'm about to announce shortly. If you're having technical difficulties, please note that on the control panel, you can click the raise hand button and the Auscontact team will rush to your aid, or you can revert to the registration confirmation email and all the relevant phone numbers and access codes are available there. So let's try out that Q&A button on the control panel now. And the question for today is one of my trick questions. What season are we currently in? And I know it's the season in which I typically melt. Okay, so we've got some shy people today. Thanks, Kath, you got it. Well done. So we've got the answers that we need. Thanks, Tim, as well. And Jan as well. Well done, guys. Thank you very, very much. So we're going, as I said, we're going to be giving away 3 prizes, and those prizes are, for the first question asked, so that's hands on keyboards, is win a Poly Studio P5 webcam. For the best question asked, and we cannot be bribed on this, a PolySync Smart speakerphone. For most questions asked, a Poly Voyager Focus 2 headset. So don't forget to ask your burning questions for a chance to win, and you still have to be here at the end of the webinar. And with that, I would like to introduce our special guests for today. And they are Belinda Hayden, Director of Strategic Alliances APAC at NICE, and Chris Main, Solution Lead and Analytics at NICE. Now, we have had a couple of technical difficulties because the internet today is not our friend. So hopefully Belinda's going to be okay with us today. Jess is going to progress the slides just to see if we can take a little bit of pressure off. And with that, let me welcome Belinda to the microphone. Welcome, Belinda.
Hi, thank you very much. Okay, so bear with me. So I just joined again. I just had to sort of log out and go back in again. So I just want to check that we're good to go, and I'm good to sort of make a start now.
Yeah, hearing you fine, Belinda.
Okay, thank you. And I have control of the let me think, am I sharing?
Belinda, you don't have control. Jess has control because of the lack of stability of your internet. So when you need the slides to progress, just say next slide to Jess, okay?
That's okay. I just rebooted, so I'll go ahead to request control if I may. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, so hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for attending this webinar. So we're going to take you through some sessions on the AI-driven technologies, how they help companies elevate their customer service to the next level and the next frontier in customer experience. So we'll be focusing on really three main areas in the next hour or so, including, first of all, demystifying AI. I think there's sort of a lot of sort of cloak and dagger stuff still around surrounding it. Really how NICE deploys AI and weaves it through the DNA of its portfolio. And also how to use really AI and AI technologies to elevate customer service. And we're going to be using a specific example Chris will take you through in terms of customer complaints and sort of how to use AI tools for that area. Okay. So, excellent. Okay. So first things first, have you ever driven to work or home and realised that you have no recollection as to how you've reached your destination? And actually driving without your brain in gear is a very common occurrence. But how does it happen? Why can we seemingly drive safely whilst having no conscious recollection of driving or navigating our way to our destination? When you think about what's required to drive a car safely, you begin to wonder how any of us manage this phenomenon of driving on autopilot. We're doing so many things at once, both physically using our feet to operate the right pedals at the right time in the same way, using our hands to change gear into the right gear at the right time, whilst using your foot to depress the clutch. And at the same time, we're mentally scanning the road ahead. We're looking out for pedestrians. We're making decisions about, the gears that we need to be in, whether we need to slow down, speed up, change lanes, indicate, checking for other cars, switching lanes. Do we need windscreen wipers on, lights, brakes, myriad of decision making. So how can it be possible that we can drive without any awareness of what we're doing and yet still be safe? So congratulations, you now understand machine learning, sort of. It's down to something in our brains called the default mode network, or DMN. And scientific investigation has now shown that our DMN, our default mode network, takes over when we're undertaking familiar activities, such as tying our shoelaces, playing a musical instrument, or, as in this case, driving a familiar route. So the way an activity becomes familiar is through repetition of identical or similarly linked pathways called neurons, jumping across nodes to create deep grooves, like you would a physically well-worn piece of carpet in the house or a path in the woods. So over time, the brain starts letting you switch off because it's so used to going from node X to Y in the context of driving from office to home that it can literally take over whilst you think of something else. Okay, and so this distributional connectedness is the same principle that we apply in artificial intelligence. We throw millions of data connections at a system, and we let the system figure out what the common pathways are. In supervised learning, we give the machine some outcomes, for example, and it uses a ton of processing power to figure out the combination of nodes and connections and ratios that build a model for that outcome. Then as we introduce more data to it over time, it goes backwards, and that's called backpropagation, to see what it would need to tweak through the different layers in order to fine-tune that model, which can then be used for both predictive outcomes and prescriptive, what would happen if we changed X, scenario planning. Okay. Just try and make sure we go through that. Okay, so we used to have this caveat of past performances, no guarantee of future performance, which I've always found quite odd. It's not sort of forwarding it for me a little bit there. make sure it goes forward. Oh. Not going to the next one. There it is. Okay, good. I have to do that a little bit manually, which is odd. Okay, so it is essentially, you know, even Dr. Phil says, you know, whenever sort of I've watched Dr. Phil, not much, you know, he said sort of past behaviour is a predictor of future behaviours. But essentially past performance, past pathways, input versus output is the very foundation of AI. And it's essentially, it's what's behind trends such as automated portfolio management called robo-advisors that use computer algorithms and advanced analytical software to manage investment portfolios and strategies. And this kind of LSTM, or long short-term memory regression model, illustrated here, uses neural networks for predicting continuous values of Google stock. And you can see how accurate it was, certainly in the shape of events, if not the exact match to the amounts. And this is the very basis of predictive modeling, and what's behind the rise of robo-advisors, which use computer algorithms to build your portfolio and manage your assets based on your goals, your tolerance to risk, and it's personalized to your risk profile and backed by, you know, petabytes of data points. And it's the data points really that are the key. Smart customer service needs data, and we have the data to move from the narrative approach to the empirical approach. NICE developed Enlighten from the world's largest labeled data set of conversational data, millions of contact center interactions across multiple verticals, intents, and geographies. So what is Enlighten? Enlighten is an engine, it's a system, a method of data modeling. It's not a product. It's made up of unique, patented, and proprietary AI algorithms, machine learning models, and methods that uncover new insights derived from uniquely comprehensive data that only NICE has. And so how does Enlighten work? And basically, it's a system that generates a model based on historical data sets where an outcome is known. For example, data where a known complaint has occurred, or where a purchase was made. So it starts with those outcomes, and it allows experts to validate and improve on the accuracy of each model and its use case. And it then enables that application of each model on a new data set to generate a score for the use case. For example, the likelihood of a complaint or the likelihood that a caller will make a purchase on these new data sets, i.e. these new interactions. So each model objectively and consistently scores topics that are not necessarily easy for different personalities to agree on, such as, you know, whether a call is a complaint. Is it a complaint, or is it an expression of dissatisfaction or, you know, a negative sentiment? It also provides scoring across all data, not just across a very small subset of interactions that are gathered either, you know, through manual sampling or by analysts writing queries to probe into the data. The models capture far more than even business analysts can capture, because they cut through the limitations of logic and provide interpretive results, but on a more consistent basis than the inconsistency that humans introduce into these interpretations. So NICE deploys NICE Enlighten AI, our unique AI brain, throughout its product suite. NICE Enlighten for customer satisfaction, which is an industry first system that combines analytics and quality to score employee behavior objectively across every single interaction, with proven and measurable sort of improvements empirically aligned to customer satisfaction and NPS scores. That means the outcome is actually sort of tied into what the customer might have scored on an NPS survey. The behaviours and skills are built and trained on you know, millions of unstructured interactions to accurately score agents on behaviours that are proven to improve outcomes such as first call resolution, and they align to customer satisfaction. Next, you have the Enlightened behavioural models. These are a series of pre-built predictive models with machine learning that identify issues and sub-issues related to risk, compliance, complaints, vulnerability, fraud, sales and customer churn. And this type of predictive modelling can be especially useful in decoding subtle and unspoken or not explicitly spoken content, such as vulnerable customer status or even fraud. Quite often a vulnerable customer does not explicitly state that they're at risk, but the combination of their questions or the information that they give or what they actually want to do on the call may align with known previous and explicit outcomes, which generates the ability for us to model these multiple types of customer vulnerability, such as financial or even domestic violence. So one customer using this model found that where vulnerability was stated in 1% of calls, where the customer actually said, you know, I'm in a vulnerable situation, either financially or whatever, it was actually correctly predicted from implicit factors in nearly 8% of calls. So they would have missed out on, you know, that other 7%. Similarly for fraud, it's the implicit clues and the combination of factors that the system will raise an alert for based on its machine learning. Of course, no one's going to ring up, obviously, and sort of give explicit factors for fraud, but it's often the combination of what they talk about. One of the things that we found, for example, in insurance is, you know, factors such as claiming on both a camera plus a phone plus, you know, certain types of behavior plus, you know, metadatas of hesitancy, etc., and they will all come together to perhaps suggest, you know, that it's looked into with a bit more detail. So these can then be fed into triggers and or real-time agent interactive guidance to avoid potentially unfortunate situations in the case of vulnerability and mitigate the impacts to both the organisation and the customer. And we're continually building new models with customers according to their insight and their KPI requirements. So essentially, we no longer need to rely on explicit articulation, subjective human listening, or in fact, agent self-reporting, you know, for the agent to actually put something in the system that says, yeah, this is a complaint call. So it's now more reliable and it saves millions of dollars in wasted manpower and potential fines. Enlighten also powers automation through a number of modules, including quality, chatbot, digital discovery, real-time guidance, and assistance. One of the biggest challenges to self-service transformation is knowing what to digitize and what to digitize first. How do you know what's a good candidate for shifting to self-service? Fortunately, we have Experience Optimizer, which basically creates your intent classification from the transcription of interactions in perfectly clustered conversational flows and assigns them a score for how simple or complex it would be to automate each classified intent. So it's capable of analysing conversations and isolating the different phrases, the identification piece and the diagnostic piece, and then weaving that into a connected flow and assessing its automation potential. For example, these customers articulate themselves in similar ways in this topic. They're simple, low-node conversational flows. They tend to have limited and solvable outcomes, etc. So, you know, that's a good simple area to digitize first. So you get an automation score for ease of digitization for these nodes, and this makes it incredibly easy not just to identify what to automate first, but also how to build these dialogue flows. You can even then go ahead and import them straight into an NLP chatbot build, which makes the whole process like super easy and creates sort of a much faster ROI on that kind of digitization and automation journey. So once you've built those digital journeys, Enlighten can deliver hyper-personalized automated content through NEVA, which is short for NICE's Employee Virtual Assistant. So the ability to work remotely, which we now have, opens up opportunities for organisations to tap into an even more diverse talent pool globally, which is great. But part of the challenge of geodiversity and heuristic flexibility is skilling up new employees. and giving them access to and consistency of information. But we can use Enlighten AI to identify gaps in knowledge and skills and behaviours in real time that drive customer dissatisfaction or predict outcomes and guide those agent skills or knowledge in real-time interaction guidance. So if customers have chosen to call or chat with the contact centre in real time, it's usually because they believe they want or need a better, more personalised service. So their expectations are that they'll be listened to, that the advice will be tailored to them specifically. And using AI, we're able to analyse the full content of behaviours and desktop feeds and recommend the next best actions to deliver on that expectations. Okay, so we've got, so also with smart routing, with Enlighten, smart routing is taken to the next gen level with hyper-personalised approach that connects customers with the most suitable resource available. We know that today's consumer craves personalised experience when interacting with brands and organisations. In fact, surveys show that 84% of consumers say personalised experiences are key to winning their business. But currently, over 95% of companies randomly route customer contacts or use techniques other than intelligent routing to connect contacts to agents. Predictive behavioural routing, or PBR, uses both historical data and the information known about a customer at the time of his or her call to connect the customer to an agent who will provide the best experience for them. So smart routing instantly combines the latest known and predicted information about the customer, even why they might be calling, for example, with agent ability to make that best routing match. And finally, AI-powered feedback identifies potentially problematic calls and triggers personalised contextual surveys in a natural conversational format, followed by a closed-loop process with personalised next actions on the relevant feedback. Okay, so we just touched on the Enlightened behavioural models used in customer satisfaction and predictive modelling. An example of the current Enlightened models include the agent skills model, which is a set of behaviours that map to the likelihood of a promoter NPS outcome so closely aligned that it can now be used to replace customer surveys on the NPS question. Interestingly, NICE Satmetrics is the technology leveraged in partnership with Bain & Company to design the original NPS methodology. So we do understand the responsibility of this pedigree. One of the models that we've been working on most recently, and that I've noticed a focus on with multiple organisations, is customer vulnerability, which also has a range of subsets, including medical, financial, situational, cognitive, etc. So by isolating the very subtle characteristics in these conversations, including the combinations of requests, unstated indicators, and characteristics, the model is able to predict and tag conversations as potentially vulnerable. The sales effectiveness and complaints models both have multiple subsets, too many to list here. For example, the complaints model has over 200 variants, including reasons for complaints and both implicit and explicit dissatisfaction. And the sales effectiveness model is equally comprehensive across all stages of the customer cycle, including, discovery, questions, and post-sales cancellations, and includes explicit signals as well as more subtle rejection or interest predictors. And finally, the fraud model, best deployed in real time, combines behaviours with biometric voice identification to cover IDMV with fraud content behaviour if it gets that far into the conversation. Similarly, we touched briefly on Experience Optimizer, and what Experience Optimizer does is it uses all the data at its disposal to create perfectly curated training sets for digitization. So using Enlighten Experience Optimizer, we analyze all of the interactions, discovering which topics could be best suited for self-service. So then we have this complexity assessment of each intent, which looks at a number of factors. First of all is the classification of the intent itself, then a subcontext such as bill payment and direct debit request. It looks at the language and the variants of the language used for similar requests. Obviously, the more similar the language used across, the whole range of customers, for example, the easier it's going to be to build that flow. The next obvious element is the first call resolution likelihood on this intent, and what was the resolution that helped solve it for the customer? Did it involve complex systems, inputs, flows, etc.? Is the resolution itself automatable? Then we look at what was committed by either the customer or the employee, and the extent to which self-service can determine and regulate its levels of authorization and commitment, such as can we give the robot permission to extend automatic deferral of payment by 30 days, but maybe not longer? That would have to go to an agent. Or we can give it the ability to send out an email or a new password reset, for example. Then there's the information regarding having to transfer these contacts to another department, which obviously increases the complexity. We also look at sentiment scores, which indicate the need for the customer engagement and the underlying frustration of the callers. And finally, multiple metadata metrics such as how long, how many times, there were turns in the conversation, to and from, duration, silence time, etc. So Experience Optimizer scores every interaction based on these metrics and creates a visual of what specific words and phrases were used within the conversation and where, to create a priority list of digital transformation intents. And the reason that I love this so much is, having been involved in intent classification and chatbot building, I know what a time-consuming and manual process it can be. And for me, this is a clear-cut and kind of no-brainer way to get quick wins on the board by automating the high volume, high ROI, but simpler flows first. So in summary, AI can greatly enhance our ability to understand and connect with the customer. And far from automating and depersonalizing, AI can really be a great ally in providing the agent with the skills for a hyper-personalized conversation, providing the customer with the best possible outcomes, and the business with total visibility and insight. So that's an overview of AI and why it's relevant to contact centres. I'm going to hand over to Chris Main in a minute to drill into specific use cases around complaint identification and management using a model that we've created and trained over millions of interactions. And sort of smooth over that handover, we're going to go through and ask you if you wouldn't mind answering a survey question, first of all.
Yes, so Belinda, let me do that while you stop sharing the screen, and then Jess can launch the poll. So we need you to get your hands on the keyboard and answer the question. You can only pick one. Where would you describe your contact centre on an AI maturity curve? You're already using artificial intelligence, have tried and failed, implementing AI currently, thinking about AI or investigating AI, not sure about AI yet, either a business case or technology, and I'm nowhere on the curve. Chris, you see quite a few implementations, across the world. What would you expect our audience to, where would you expect them to be on the curve?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So first and foremost, in terms of what Belinda has described, we don't see any other vendors at all in terms of contact center technology vendors or AI vendors having as complete a solution as we do to, it's really ready to go, plug and play. So there are not too many organizations that are hot, been hot off the blocks with this. There are, I think, quite a lot of organizations that have had IT and technology-led AI programs looking at, big data and so on and so forth, but nothing that really flows out to the front line to drive customer experience improvement drive increases in agent effectiveness and operational efficiency. So kind of multi-dimensional answer there, but hope that's a little bit useful.
So most interesting, 59% of our audience said they're only thinking about AI or investigating AI. So it looks like a great opportunity to have a deeper conversation. Over to you, Chris.
Sure, cool. Guys, check in. You can see my screen, right? I think everyone's used to hearing that on every video presentation ever. So yeah, my name's Chris Main. I've been working for NICE for around 6 years now. I'm based in Melbourne. If any of the audience are around Melbourne, maybe look forward to catching up at some point. What I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is just give you a run through of really specific way that we can implement AI technology in your contact center today. So taking, I think, what was really quite a broad spectrum overview that Belinda's given us. Thanks very much, Belinda. I'm going to talk through our experience, some case studies, and how we see this working in your space. And I'd certainly love to, any questions you've got, just drop them into the chat. We'll get to them later. So we're going to be talking about complaints. We're going to start with the obvious. What is a complaint? We'll talk a little bit about the regulatory compliance space and why that's relevant. Who cares about complaints? Well, the answer is everybody, but we'll be a bit more specific. And then how do we solve this complaints problem with AI technologies? Okay, so what is a complaint? Well, we probably all have a fairly good idea of what is or is not a complaint. If you're coming from the contact center space, sometimes people are very vocal about make a complaint. I want to complain, give me the CEO's address, I'm going to send them an email. All very obvious examples, but I think some of the points Belinda was making was that actually the definition of complaints can be really wide and varied and definitely subjective, subject to interpretation between you and me and 10 other people that might be evaluating complaints in your organization. But we've had a crack at making a definition here. So it's really about an expression of dissatisfaction, oral or written, about the provision of a financial service or a failure to provide a financial service, resulting in financial loss, material distress, or material inconvenience. And as a result, we're seeing organizations, some of them very publicly, getting hauled in front of the regulator, massive fines, not to mention things like customer churn and reputational damage. I'm sure you can all think of a few choice examples that you've seen. And I've just, for the purposes of clarity, I've called out a few regulator examples, and they're relevant because we've provided solutions to organizations in these regions. So Australia, obviously Singapore, CFPB in the US, we'll see this in the next slide, Financial Conduct Authority in the UK. We've helped our customers respond to regulations, from these organizations. But focusing on the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, I think it's relevant for me just to highlight this because this is the kind of backdrop that exists in the United States that really drove us as an organization, via requests from our customers to develop this tool set around complaint identification and management. So CFPB, so the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which established this. If anyone follows American politics, this was Senator Elizabeth Warren's initial claim to fame. So I guess over the last 10 or 12 years, well, this is 2010 to 2020, it's $12.9 billion in consumer relief. So that's like waiving fines, fees, interest, and so on, affecting 175 American citizens with 1.6 billion in penalties levied on those financial services organizations. So the pressure that organizations feel to respond to and be compliant to these regulations is real. In some cases, it can be, an existential risk for an organization not to, be compliant to, complaints legislation. But I think as much as the business driver for us was really helping our customers respond to regulatory requirements, I think it's probably fair to say maybe not everyone in the audience is working for a financial services organization, but fundamentally, and I hope you agree, complaints are bad for business. So whether you have a requirement to talk to a regulator or not, you probably want to be in the front foot of understanding customer complaints, responding to them appropriately. Super quick snapshot of what's happening locally. I know we looked at the US, but let's get a little bit more Australian. So ASIC, this regulatory guideline 271, which provides a really explicit definition of a complaint. There's an expectation now that organizations that are regulated by this authority, have tools and technologies in place to identify and manage and respond to and report on customer complaints in their space. And I've highlighted this. I actually just found this out recently and found it staggering, but the maximum fine that ASIC can levy is whatever's bigger, 10% of annual turnover, or $555 million, which is just, it blows my mind. And certainly, if you have a quick Google, you'll realize that the relevant regulatory bodies are not shy about dishing out fines. So again, the threat is real. I'm not trying to run a scare campaign here, but I'm talking to a lot of organizations right now, existing customers and prospects that are responding to these types of legislations. So, within those organizations that, NICE are currently speaking to, who cares about complaints? Certainly anyone that's risk and compliance, customer service, customer care, marketing executives to an extent. And I think, anyone that's in contact center operations, contact center managers, not because they themselves are, going to feel so much heat from the regulator, but complaints are bad for business. It drives repeat contacts into the contact center. Those interactions take longer. Those customers are dissatisfied. They don't buy as much. They might be at a higher risk of churn. So they want to know about complaints so that they can proactively coach and train the frontline employees. And really sort of catch-all bucket here, anyone in financial services or indeed a regulated industry, which might include energy, utilities, that sort of thing. And the types of questions that they're asking is, along the lines of, look, we have this regulatory requirement. We need to report to the regulator how many complaints we've had. How do I find them? Because today I'm relying on agents to log it for me, and it's inconsistent and it's incomplete, and I have a challenge reporting on it holistically. I really want to offset my reputational, financial, and compliance risk, again, depending on which stakeholder we might be talking to. And again, very real concerns over the consistency and accuracy of their existing program. And even if they do manage to get a decent program up and running, customer expectations, regulations are ever evolving. So we need to be able to scale and respond to a changing environment. Pardon me. And again, laboring the point, complaints bad for business. So let's have a little bit of a deeper dive look at complaints, operationalizing AI in your contact center. Now, I'll start off by talking to this slide, which is about the importance of a consumer complaint management system. And I guess this isn't for me to tell you how important it is for you to have a consumer complaint management system. Many of you, you'll be on the front line, you'll be dealing with this day in, day out. You'll know it better than I do. This is actually, my attempt to tell you that we've done a lot of work in this space, and I think we understand complaints quite well, and we've actually got some really great solutions that we think can help. So, we want to, of course, if it's relevant for your organization, help you respond to your regulatory requirements, but fundamentally, let's not forget that these regulations are actually in place to protect, your customers. So, being compliant, doing the right thing, better for customer experience, holistically, not just on the call in the contact center. As I mentioned, there's some very real operational efficiency gains to be able to proactively identify, triage, manage, respond to, customer complaints. Very simply, what are they complaining about and how can I fix that so it doesn't keep happening? so that I don't have to keep speaking to all these angry, upset customers. Let's fix that issue upstream. If only I knew what it was. And I've made the point already, but we really want to ensure that our customers are not exposed to any reputational risks. So getting out in front of any complaints, making sure it doesn't go to the regulator, and staying off the front page of the Herald Sun, I think, should be a KPI for a lot of people. So just looking now at the, I guess, the current state, and this really summarizes, where a lot of organizations are today. So how are you currently identifying complaints? Well, very likely, as we said before, it's agent-led, which means it's inconsistent. You're asking the agent to do something else in addition to, addressing the customer's need and, leaving the right wrap code and so on and so forth. So you're definitely not capturing all the complaints. You're definitely not catching the sort of a richness of information around why people are complaining. Really inconsistent classifications, as we've mentioned a few times. And if you're thinking, well, I get X number of complaints per week, which is, Y number of complaints annually, and it's taking my agents 25 seconds to actually log that in this other system, how much time and effort is that actually costing me to do that? And, even if I do manage to capture a meaningful number of complaints, how do I then drill down into that and really understand why they're complaining? What are the 10 things that have happened before that have led them to this point that they feel they need to complain? And then should I then be able to funnel, that list of complaints to somewhere, a team or a follow-up owner? How do I know that that's actually being actioned upon, they're doing something about it, and we're actually, we've gone to all this time and effort to capture this information. I need to be sure that I'm actually driving some form of business improvement from that, because this is actually great information. So if we accept, these challenges as the current state for a lot of organizations, it's inconsistent, it's incomplete, it's manual, it's time consuming, it's expensive, I've got no visibility of why, and I don't know if anything's happening with it. I guess the all loaded questions, but wouldn't it be great if we had a really sophisticated tool set that leveraged AI and machine learning that could automatically classify across 100% of my interactions if something is a complaint, what they're complaining about. And wouldn't it be great if I didn't have to sit for 12 months and build out a whole bunch of complex logic if it was ready to go, but I could also customize it to my own environment. And we could get that up and running really quickly. So that's, kind of a really salesy pitch for, Enlighten AI for complaint management. But it really can be that simple. And I think I saw a question come in the chat there. What do we need from you? Well, we'll get to this shortly, but we're very happy to run proofs of concept. Very happy to take, a bunch of calls off you. We can run it through our system, tell you what is and is not a complaint. And hopefully we will, when we do so, we'll be able to prove out that we're identifying and classifying more complaints than your current manual process. And I think just to sort of reiterate, I guess, the heritage, and I know my colleague Belinda touched on this quite a bit, this concept of the largest database of interactions or training data sets. I just want to make it really clear what that is and why it's relevant. It's a bucket of millions of calls that a human has listened to and labeled as a complaint or not a complaint. So that when we run it through a machine learning model, we get a model of what a complaint looks like. So that when we show it your calls, it can tell us whether or not it is or is not a complaint. So I guess that's machine learning and AI in a nutshell for me. That's how I understand it. And I think in addition to having the data and the tools to build AI models, we've got really good domain experience. Nice, I've been in contact centers for donkey's years. And I think that understanding of the space really has really helped us address really compelling use cases, one of which is complaints. So how would it work? Well, we would deploy into your organization a complaint identification model. So is an interaction a complaint or not? Yes, no. Then we would develop with you a series of classification models. So sure, we know it's a complaint. What are they actually complaining about? And then once we've sort of gathered and quantified all this really great information for you, what are you going to do about it? Well, the good news is there's a lot of pre-built tools, workflows, dashboards that we can plug in, good to go, and they can help get the right information to the right people in a timely manner so that they can then follow up, call the customer back, get ahead of a complaint, respond to it in a timely fashion, again, before it escalates, before they call back, before they go to the regulator. And I think actually I've kind of got ahead of myself a little bit, but this is this slide just really sort of again iterates how it works. Interactions from all channels, so that's email, that's chat, that's voice. Doesn't matter what technology you have today, you can integrate with anything. Run it through the model. Is it a complaint? Yes, no. Run it through the classification models as I've described. And I think what's also interesting is that, yes, no, is it a complaint? We actually present that information on a continuum. So you as an organization can, set the bar about, how egregious you think a complaint needs to be before you're going to follow up. So you've got some control over, the interactions that are going into that workflow and being presented to the follow-up team to do something useful with. I've been at pains to point out several times that complaints are bad for business. These are actual results from a proof of concept that we did last year. When we were doing the complaints analysis, we recognized that 25% of those complaint calls ended up calling back. So high propensity for repeat calls. We recognized that sentiment was a lot worse on complaint calls. Our interaction analytics platform has a really sophisticated sentiment model to tell us how happy or sad customers are. And of course, no surprises, way, way higher risk of customer churn should the customer get to the point of making a complaint to you. So not only can we help financial services organizations be compliant, but I think we've got a really strong business case in any organization to help them drive operational efficiencies, cost down and improve customer experience with a really sounds complex, but it's actually a really simple thing to deploy. The base solution would include Nexidia Interaction Analytics, which handles all of the, speech-to-text transcription, analysis, all that stuff. Then we run the Enlighten AI model across the top of that. And we've got some other cool add-ons, particularly something like real-time guidance. So wouldn't it be cool if you could not only get a sort of report that says you had 100 complaints yesterday, but if the agent could get an alert in real time as the conversation was happening to say, hey, this customer's complaining, whether you realize it or not. What do we want to do about that? And of course, I'll quickly mention Quality Central. We want to be able to feed this information to a really sophisticated quality management program. But let's talk a little bit about real time. This is an actual use case from one of our customers. So the customer, pardon me, calls in and complains about a late fee. The model picks that up. The agent is alerted to the fact that they're complaining about a late fee. The agent knows that if this customer has made their last 6 payments online, then that unlocks for them the authority to waive that late fee and move the customer on. So we can alert the agent as to the next best action in real time and actually run the soft skill behavioral models at the same time. So something like empathy. I can really understand that that's a frustrating experience for you. I'm sorry you've got a late fee. Let me waive it for you. And we can see, of course, how that affects sentiment in real time presented to the agent in the dashboard. I keep bumping that button. We can drive from that in all sorts of supervisor alerting and escalations and so on and so forth. But suffice to say, it's a really cool use case. And I think increasingly we're having more and more conversations with organizations about our real-time capabilities. Okay, conscious of time, so I'm going to crack on. I'll just really quickly touch on this, that we have have existing customers. This is a really large international bank who had like dozens of primary complaint classifications, 120 odd secondary classifications, and they were having their agents do all this manually across millions of calls a year. And again, taking 25 seconds, per complaint to log that times hundreds of thousands to millions of calls a year, the business case stacked up effortlessly. We're able to, proceed from a really successful POC to a really successful production deployment. Again, complaint identification, classification. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. So comply with regulations, improve efficiency, protect your reputation. We've spent a lot of time talking about complaint management. We've touched on the customer satisfaction models, and I think Belinda has also referenced our vulnerability and sales effectiveness models. These are all pre-built, plug and play. It's not going to take you a year to build out logic and libraries of key phrases like it would with traditional speech analytics. And the best part is, at least for me, if this is really interesting for you, we'd love to run a test drive with you. So if you haven't dealt with NICE before, we love doing proofs of concept. We will do that for you at no cost if you're really serious about moving forward with us. So with that, I'm going to pause, and Fiona, back to you in the studio. Thank you.
I love it, the studio. Thanks, Chris. Look, some really great information, and boy, have the attendees been active with their questions. There's 30 questions to answer. So it's a little frightening, I think, given the time frame that we've got, because I know everyone's probably ready to duck off to their next meeting at 2 o'clock. So what I will say to everybody that has attended today, rest assured that you will get a response from the NICE team to each and every one of your questions. It will be highly personalised to you. But with 4 minutes left, maybe, Belinda, can I ask you for your closing remarks, please?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much. We know that an hour out of your time is extremely valuable, and I do see some really smart questions there. A lot of them focusing on things like reporting, proof, ROI, business case, and evidence. And the answer to most of those questions is yes, with a more detailed response to be followed up.
Yeah, thanks, Belinda. Absolutely, because I could see as they came in, there is no doubt that everything that was asked, NICE has a solution or in terms of your kit, which is great. Chris, your closing remarks.
Sure. Again, I just echo Belinda's sentiment. Thanks so much for your time. We're really excited about all these capabilities. I hope you are too. Certainly at a minimum, I think it'd be worth connecting and having a good old yarn about it. If this isn't exactly in your wheelhouse, I'm sure we'll get something that is.
And Moira has asked, can everybody please get a copy of the answer to all the questions? And the answer is absolutely. And you'll all get a copy of the recording as well. So thank you to Belinda and to Chris for sharing such wonderful information today. From a technical and a practical perspective, I think that has really added lots and lots of layers of information so that our audience is well informed and may be able to talk nice to people. Who knows? With that, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day wherever you happen to be. And we'll see you next time. And thank you to NICE, our National Gold sponsors. See you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Fiona, and thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.